All right, so we're going to get started with today's webinar, Maximizing Hospital IT and Clinical Staff Endpoint Device Productivity with IGEL and Coretek Services, featuring Sparrow Health System. And before we get started, I just have a few housekeeping items. Everyone who is attending the webinar is muted today. If you have any questions or if you something is not working and you have a few questions, you can either enter them in the chat window or the question box. Either one will be monitored throughout the webinar. If you're having any trouble hearing, we do recommend you turn up your volume. Again, today's webinar will be recorded, and we will provide that recording to you in a follow-up email, which you can watch at your leisure. And again, if you have any questions or you have questions on how to use the service, you can enter them in either the chat box or the question box. All right, and with that, I will hand it over to Simon with IGEL.
Thank you very much, Hannah. My name is Simon Cleffin, and I'm here today from IGEL. Extremely pleased to be here talking with Sparrow Health Systems. I've had the pleasure of interviewing Sparrow before when I was working for Absent, and we talked to them a little bit about their implementation there, but an interesting new twist on that today and how they're using their endpoint management capabilities from IGEL and how Coretek's helping them implement that. I think you're going to find this an entertaining and interesting session. What we plan for you today is a discussion about what's going on there, and then a roundtable discussion. I've got a bunch of questions queued up, and I'll be digging into what Brian and Aaron have been doing. And then we'll have a roundtable discussion, and then we'll throw it open to questions and answers from you, the audience. So please don't hesitate to ask any questions. We would request that you put them into the question and answer box, and then we'll be following up on them and answering them as we go through. As questions come through, and if it's appropriate, I'll interrupt Brian and Aaron and ask them questions and figure things out. So you don't have to wait to the end to fire away with your questions. And then finally, we'll have a wrap up, and we have a little bit of a contest going at IGEL that we'd like to tell you a little bit about at the very end of this session, which I think you'll be pleased to hear or listen in to the end of this session. So that's the agenda. Now let's move on to the introductions. Next slide, please. Hannah. And first of all, myself, I am the VP of Business Development at IGEL. I joined about 6 months ago, and my role is essentially to ensure the success of the company, and in particular, I look at how IGEL can be effective in the healthcare space. It's been a personal passion of mine. I love dealing with hospitals and figuring out ways where technology can improve patient care. There's so many changes going on in this industry that this is a perfect time to be involved in this space, and we've got a lot of exciting stories to tell at IGEL, and looking forward to sharing some of those, and certainly many of them are posted on our website. I'm also delighted to be here joined with Matt Kidder from Coretek Services, who will introduce himself in just a minute. But first, let's get an introduction to Brian and to Aaron. Brian, can you give us a couple of minutes on who you are and what your role is, please?
Yeah, sure. So my name is Brian Schur. I am the Client and Services Manager for Sparrow Health. I manage a number of different technologies. I'm a somewhat recent move to the management team here at Sparrow. I come from a technical background. I was a Citrix engineer and architect for Sparrow for about 7 years before I moved into the management role. I've been with Sparrow for about 10 total. I moved to Sparrow from a life insurance company, Jackson National Life, where I held a somewhat similar role on their desktop services team. So come from a very long technical background. I still have somewhat of a hard time of giving up the technical questions to my team at times, but I'm excited to see where my management life will lead me. So, Aaron?
My name is Aaron Lopez. I am one of the Citrix engineers here at Sparrow. I've been in my current role for about 7 years. have worked for Sparrow for a total of almost 19 years and worked my way up through the ranks of IT, starting at a help desk, pretty much taking calls, doing field services, and then working my way up in our team up to the position I am now. I've worked with thin clients probably a good, since they've been in Sparrow, probably a good 15 plus years. We've had thin clients in our environment, so I've been thin clients for a very long time, Wise in particular, so we went through quite a few versions of their hardware and software both, so I'm quite familiar with how that all works. I'm also our Epic SME as well, so I have a lot of familiarity with the relationship between our thin client endpoint devices and Epic and how it all ties together. Yeah, I've had a lot of experience with these devices, and I'm happy to share my my knowledge and my experience with them.
Thank you, Aaron. Matt?
All right, I am Matt Kidder. I'm our Director of Consulting Services at Coretek. I've been there about almost, over 9 years now. We spend a lot of time in the healthcare space. We specialize in cloud and Azure deployments, as well as what we dub our Virtual Clinical Workstation solution, which Sparrow leverages. We have 200,000 desktops deployed as of right now out in the healthcare space over the last 9 years, with multiple evolutions of the solution, leveraging technologies such as IGEL or AppSense, Citrix, and so forth, is that delivery mechanism to be able to take and virtualize that cloud, or virtualize that virtual desktop solution, so that clinicians can roam quickly device to device while maintaining session state within their EMR and application stack, and it really offers a great workflow. So that's what Sparrow is leveraged and what they're deploying down to the IGEL devices today. So happy to be here, and thanks for the opportunity.
Thank you, Matt, Brian, Aaron. Looking forward to continuing our discussions. Okay, now we're going to delve a little bit deeper into, I've asked Brian and Aaron to talk a little bit about what their implementation is at Sparrow. So next slide, please, Hannah. And over to you, Brian. Tell us a little bit more about how Sparrow Health Systems, please.
Sure. So Sparrow is a hospital system located in Lansing, Michigan, as our headquarters. We have 5 hospital locations throughout the mid-Michigan area: Lansing, Ionia, Clinton, Carson, and we have a brand new facility that we're excited to be moving into a business relationship with, is Hayes Green Beach Hospital in Eaton Rapids. Those are all critical access hospitals, so 20, 30 beds, and provides an emergency department and some minor services. And then our main facility, which is in the picture on the slide here, is our hospital located in Lansing. We provide a lot of our major services here. We have a pretty big specialty units, a lot of different floors, a lot of different types of care that we give at this facility. As you can see from the slide, we're looking at 1,000 plus doctors, 10,000 plus total users. Our Citrix environment that we use to host our EMR, we see upwards of 3,000 plus concurrent users connected to it, kind of at our peak time of the day. We support 6,100 desktops, not about 970, about 1,000 thin clients. We support a very wide range of inpatient and ambulatory settings. We do have family health practices. We have urgent care style facilities, and we're growing rapidly in that space. About 3 years ago, we had about 20 of those settings, and we're up to over 60 now. So we're growing that very, very, very rapidly. We're also starting to provide our EMR as a service to some of our physicians that are in the community that wish to stay independent. So effectively, we're delivering our Epic solution to them as a service that they can use to care for their patients. We have a very strong culture of patient first. As you can see, I included our, we call it our Sparrow Triangle on the slide here. Our patient is at the top of this triangle for a very good reason. We're always very patient focused. We in IT don't have a lot of direct impact on those patients, but we affect the lives of people who care for those patients. And so, if they can't do their job effectively, we've hamstrung their ability to care for a patient well. So we're very, very focused on that patient relationship here at Sparrow, and we look for that quality, in both our IT systems and in our care. So what Simon was saying about how to get a physician to be able to roam between workstations is really important. Getting them able to move from system to system and keep that patient chart open and being able to continue where they left off are the efficiencies that we look for from this system and how we give that care. And if you can go to the next slide for me. So Sparrow, my team in particular, is made up of 7 Windows engineers and 8 Citrix endpoint engineers. Aaron is one of our Citrix endpoint engineers. We've got a pretty diverse group of folks. We administrate a lot of different technologies. You can see on the right there, I've included a bunch of them. Our team owns the Windows and Microsoft software stacks, so both from a server operating system perspective as well as an endpoint operating system. We do System Center for patching. We use AppSense, as Simon indicated, for a lot of our user management. System Center for patching. Our printing environment is an area where we've recently made some changes, and we're seeing some good benefits out of that. We've partnered with a couple of different companies, PrinterLogic and Plus Technologies, to make our world a better place in that area. Printing is a sore spot for a lot of hospital systems, and we are certainly no exception to that. We use Imprivata IGEL is brand new for us here on what we're kind of focusing on talking about today. We use Lenovo today for our full client devices at our endpoint. We're a pretty big Citrix XenApp shop. VMware vSphere for our OS hypervisor, and then we use Cisco UCS blades, and this environment runs on our Pure Storage platform. Our whole environment, we support 1,300 servers. We're getting very close to having all of them virtualized. We're still dealing with some areas in that virtualization effort that are more difficult, things that have physically built-in cards, and some of those challenges are harder to deal with. But as you can see, we're better than 90% in that virtualization role. We already talked a little bit about our peak Citrix sessions concurrency. Got about 300 applications we support. So as you can see, this is a very diverse set of systems that we support, and it makes for a lot of complexity in how they all play together and how they all work together to provide that patient experience that we're really driving towards and really looking for. It can get complicated to manage all of these different technologies, and that's where the size of the team, we have specialties within the team. We call them SME or subject matter expertise areas, where different individuals on the team are responsible to be that knowledge expert for that particular technology. Aaron, who's with us today, is our SME for IGEL and for our Epic client delivery. So with that, I'll move us on to the next slide. And Aaron, if you want to tell us a little bit about our IGEL deployment.
Sure. How we actually started this IGEL, I guess, pilot and demo. We were introduced to it by Matt Kidder, actually, and so we started with that initial office demo of doing a proof of concept with a published desktop with an IGEL device, and connecting those two together, and essentially seeing what Matt made it. I guess he provided us the experience we were looking for, which we wanted to look and feel a lot like a Windows system, without the end user noticing a difference between what they were using to at that point compared to using it to the IGEL. So with those assistants, we actually set all that up. Once we were happy with that setup, we then moved forward with our pilot of 30 WOW devices in a clinical unit, and That went very well. We had a couple minor changes to make during that implementation, but overall, the unit manager that I worked with and the floor that I worked with were really good about the feedback they provided us during the implementation, and also what changes we had to make when we did make them.
Aaron, which unit did we do that pilot on?
We did that on our what we call 5 West, which is in that picture of the hospital you see in that tower. It's the 5th floor of that tower, and that's our it's not our oncology unit. It is our oncology unit on our inpatient oncology unit in the hospital. So we did that initial pilot. I think we left it up there. I think it was around a month or so that we actually let that and sit there and get all the feedback that we wanted, and then we made the decision to go ahead and move forward with the rest of the hospital, which you can see was pretty close to 1,000 devices that we did within 2 months. And during that time, actually, with Coretek's assistance, we were actually doing a mass cleanup, which is our yearly maintenance of our WOW cart devices that require, it's just some basic maintenance. We make sure that all the batteries are in good working order, that they're cleaned, dusted, sanitized, just a basic once over on those devices during that time. So we were able to do, the nice part about the IGEL deployment is a fast enough imaging process where we could actually image the device in the WOW unit while it was being cleaned and have it done almost at the same time he was done cleaning. We were ready to redeploy that device. So it worked out very well for us having the carts cleaned at the same time that we did the IGEL conversion, which in the past we have not been able to do that with our cleanup. We had to, when we did updates to our carts before, we would have to do a completely different workflow. So the IGEL conversion was a very welcome blessing. Some of the complexities that we ran across, and we're still working on. That first one there is a big one. Is our Topaz e-signature pad integration between Epic and Publish Desktop. What we're doing with that right now, we are working with Citrix and Topaz in particular about getting some of that ironed out. We're having some trouble with the COM port redirection. So we are very close on getting that resolved because we got about 120 carts or so that we're waiting to convert over to when we have that working. So that's about all that's left for us to complete our conversion. But we have to make sure that Topaz e-signature is working so that we can do those patient signatures in forms within Epic. And then a couple of the other things I just wanted to highlight, some of the things I was able to address with IGEL's UMS is the numlock configuration, because we have thin client laptops in our health system. They are usually tied to our Pyxis medication dispense stations. Yeah, they're in our bedrooms, and several bedrooms. Some floors have 2 to 3 bedrooms, and they'll have these IGEL or these laptops, these thin client laptops, sitting on the device so that a nurse or somebody dispensing medications can roam from their workstation out on the floor to that device, badge in, and see what, just to recall anything they had to go in there for their patients, and then log it all within Epic. So we did convert all those over, and the thing we noticed was our thin client laptops is they don't have a number pad on them. They're very small, and by default, usually on a workstation or a cart, you want that numlock on because they have a full keyboard. Well, you kind of don't want that on a laptop that doesn't have a number lock because you have all your keys that essentially are misconfigured. So we really use UMS to essentially turn that off only for those particular devices, and it was transparent to the user, except the fact that now they don't have numbers being punched in instead of letters, which was a huge help. And then the other one is our screen timeout settings and matching and Bravada policy settings. That is in reference to different areas of the hospital have different timeouts that we had to address. We have our default is, for most clinical units is like a 5-minute timeout. We don't want, if somebody walks away from the device where patient family members or the public can can potentially get access to it, within 5 minutes that device will lock, and a user will have to unlock the device. But there are also other areas like our outpatient surgeries where not a lot of public access is in there. So we have like a 15-minute, and then we have one that they never lock, and that's pretty much in a surgical suite area that we know no public access is going to be on those computers. So we were able to handle all that between UMS and Imprivata, and all that tied together really well for us. So it was the UMS software has made that very easy to manage. And then we can go to the next slide, please. And this is just a kind of an overview of how everything talks to each other in our environment and the versions that we use. We are on a Citrix published desktop version 7.9. We're on Imprivata appliance version 5.1. Our IGEL UMS server version is 5.03.100, and then the UDC version that we use on our IGEL devices is the 5.10.100.01. You see on the top here, pretty much all of our devices are wireless. So I can't think of any offhand. There is actually one caveat to that, but we still use wireless today. Potentially we could cut them over to a wired network, and that's in our critical care units. We have the ceiling mounted device that these devices are in. And if we had to, for some reason we lost Wi-Fi, we could turn them over to a wired network. That way, in those critical care areas, they still have network connectivity on those devices. But pretty much you see how the device from the wireless network, pretty much it talks to all these devices, talks to the Citrix published desktop, the Imprivata appliance, which have a very close association. That's how we handle policies between the two, and where that device connects to. And of course, our IGEL UMS server, which is our management for the endpoint devices themselves, to customize them and tailor them to what we need.
Excellent. Thank you. Really appreciate that overview of exactly what you're up to. And as you were talking, I had a couple of questions. Brian, I'm going to start with you. I think we'll actually probably move on to the next slide, please, Hannah. So we've got a good view of where we've come from and what's going on at Sparrow, and we're now going to do a sort of roundtable discussion, and I'm going to drill down a little bit, and then I'm going to throw it open to questions from the audience. So if you start to think of any questions, please enter them in the question box or the chat box, depending on what you've got available on your GoToWebinar interface, and we look forward to answering some of those questions. But Brian, a first question for you. So, healthcare is changing, a lot of consolidation going on at the moment. I was wondering if you could just walk us through, as you do these mergers with new hospitals, and in particular you talked about onboarding basically these outpatient facilities, and you're offering the EMR as a service to sort of the local facilities. What are the sort of the IT issues that come top of mind? What scares you most as management comes out and says, we're going to merge with this new hospital, we're going to add these new clinics? How are you dealing with those problems, and what sort of resources do you need to be successful to make that happen?
Yeah, sure. So that's a great question. I think the biggest problem we generally have is where IT in healthcare is somewhat of a second thought to a lot of these merger and acquisition style conversations. And so we find ourselves a lot of the times in a situation where we've already purchased an organization before we've even so much as done a walkthrough and looked at what IT systems they have deployed today. And so we're always kind of starting from a back foot and having to go through and address whatever they are currently using. We've gotten pretty experienced at it, is the good side of the story. And so, we're on our third major hospital system right now that we're pulling under the Sparrow name and consolidating their IT organization. And it has become very much a kind of a quick transition away from their current systems onto our standard deployments that we use on our other hospital systems. What we find is that a lot of the reason why these systems are not very effective and are looking to be purchased is because they lack the efficiencies gained by some of these better IT systems. And so while IT in a lot of these cases has been a driver, it's also thought of kind of second nature. And so it really results in us going in, doing a very deep, detailed assessment, trying to figure out what do we want to keep of theirs. For example, is their switching infrastructure still acceptable, or do we need to replace that? We have all of those conversations up front as we integrate their IT organizations, with the end state, the end goal being deploying our Epic solution, including our Endpoint devices, our IGEL devices, all of these tools into that hospital system, thereby getting them the efficiencies that they're really looking for under that acquisition style model. You know, when you're talking about challenges, I would say a lot of the times it's the same challenges we had years ago when we first started to deploy an EMR. It's how do people learn new technologies? How do they get used to the ways in which these technologies save them time and effort, but that requires change, and change is difficult sometimes. So I would say probably our biggest challenge is convincing people that the change is good.
Absolutely. And throwing that over to you, Matt, from your perspective, I know Coretek spends a lot of time with different hospitals, and so you probably have a good sort of perspective on some of those integration issues. Maybe you could give us your 2 cents worth on how some of the Coretek solutions help in this space of integrating IT capabilities, please.
Sure. So when we really try to take a step back when we go into an organization and understand their business drivers, right? So we're trying to look at what is it you're trying to accomplish, and then how can we leverage that technology that we're familiar with to help resolve those business challenges. Oftentimes it is related to that merger and acquisition. So how can we be help an organization become a more dynamic delivery organization, so that they have the ability to get, as they go through that M&A, they can absorb the application stack from the other hospital and deliver that in addition to the new applications for that health system or ambulatory facility or whatever that might be out into the field, so that time to kind of get them up and running and integrated into that health system is decreased drastically. And we'll leverage on-prem solutions, we'll leverage cloud solutions. The time to deploy into Azure in today's day and age is nominal as compared to on-site by the time you do the procurement for hardware and software and so forth, when you can go do that same kind of workload in Azure. And the hybrid approach has allowed us to really deliver that dynamic solution. And then, of course, making sure that those endpoints that we're delivering from our two are kind of as generic as possible, if you will, right? That they're easy to manage, that we can get that virtual desktop down to without having to worry about, oh, well, what version of Windows is it patched and how am I going to do antivirus? Just eliminate all of those licensing costs so we can help out with the budgets associated with these types of activities as well.
Okay. Matt, you're breaking up just a little bit. Are you using the voice over IP? You might want to think about calling in on the phone line. I'm having a little trouble hearing you.
Sorry, I might have just been too far away from a mic. I'm closer now.
Okay, that's better. All right. My next question was, and it's a question for all three of you really, is the security issue. You know, we hear this time and time again. You know, there's continued outbreaks of WannaCry going on across Europe. We hear more and more horrifying stories about that. And I assume that it's a huge problem as you onboard external physicians. And I'd love to know, you know, how do you ensure the security of your systems when you're having third parties to essentially, as you say, using your EMR as a service to make sure that they get a secure connection and you're not bringing on board, inheriting problems from them as they come onto the system. How are you dealing with that, Brian, Aaron, and Matt, your perspective as well? We'll start with Brian.
Yeah, sure. So I would say it's difficult. We have a lot of different systems that run a lot of different operating systems. We on my team support our general computing environment, and so a lot of our devices are somewhat standard. But healthcare has a lot of devices that aren't. We have systems that run our CT X-ray machines, for example, that are not our standard Windows 7 or Windows 10 or whatever devices. They're very unique and have very unique security profiles that are associated with that. Like you're referring to WannaCry, I think this is an area where healthcare has not done a great job, historically speaking. We don't have the focus on it, at least not the historical ingrained focus that a lot of other industries like finance industry, they have a very long history of having to address those problems. We're, I guess you could say, new at this. Having said that, we have a pretty strong IT security team here at Sparrow. They challenge us on our patching mechanisms, on our up-to-date mechanisms, and we do as good of a job as we can to try and address those situations and make sure that we're as well protected as we can. We use a lot of firewall segmentation of some of those clinical systems to make sure that we're both protecting ourselves from them and we're protecting them from ourselves, as well as challenging our vendors of some of those clinical devices to make sure that they stay up to date and that they're able to patch their systems for these security exploits. Aaron, I don't know if you want to talk maybe a little bit more about this specific project we're talking about today.
In particular, when we're talking IGEL as opposed to a Windows device, especially for our thin client environment, which is what we did. We converted our Windows devices over to IGEL. Having a Windows device that has a write filter on it, which our thin clients did, makes them very difficult to maintain as far as even, yes, you don't have the potential for them to really get infected per se, because we don't really run anything on those endpoint devices, but they're still a Windows device, and we all know how that can be, and they do still need to be patched, just like any other Windows device. Having a write filter in place really limited what we could do with them, so we did not update them as often as we would have liked. Converting over to a Linux-based IGEL desktop essentially has eliminated that for us. There's a lot of things we can do centrally managing them now rather than on an endpoint-to-endpoint basis, which makes managing, especially these devices, because there are so many, extremely easy. As far as like our clients, what Brian was alluding to, I happen to also be our McAfee or antivirus client administrator, so it's challenging. We have several devices out there that either one, don't contact our internal network very often, that make it extremely challenging to update those devices and keep them up to date on their latest engines and DATs and all sorts of stuff. But we do a pretty good job of keeping the number of what we would call non-compliant devices to a minimum. So it definitely is a challenge, especially at, like I said, with all of our outlying areas and these machines that don't connect as frequently as we would like.
Yeah, and this is Matt. So those are great points, and some of the other things that we look at at Coretek, right, is making sure that we're protecting at the hypervisor layer as much as possible, right, to increase user densities and so forth. So we're running scans there. We're also looking at solutions like conditional access, for example, where we can monitor users' activity is kind of that perimeter, right? Instead of just a firewall and blocking off those pieces and parts, we're taking a look at, well, someone has accessed a desktop. They were in Lansing, Michigan 5 minutes ago, and now they're over in China, and they're accessing their virtual desktops through that solution. So wait a minute, something must be wrong. So leveraging a lot of those types of solutions where we can monitor the activity of what's going on with the user, how they're going about accessing the solution, and then controlling whether or not they're getting in or whether we're prompting for additional authentication mechanisms to have that user validate who they are so we can block that potential attack and or suspicious activity. So.
Very good. Yeah, I think it's a topic that's on everybody's minds at the moment, is how do we ensure security. So I know that, I just spend a lot of time thinking about how can we make sure that the IGEL OS is secure, that it builds on itself, and we overcome some of the issues that you get with the Windows. Aaron, I was hoping we could drill down just a little bit about the look and feel of the Windows system. You mentioned in your introductory comments about how important it is for the end users. Tell me, first of all, why is that so important? And I think I probably know the answer, but I just want to hear you reiterate it. And two is, how do you make the performance, you get the performance that's sort of snappy for the end users? And what has your experience been around that with using the IGEL OS on the endpoint devices as opposed to Windows? Aaron, over to you.
Well, I guess, first of all, because we use a Citrix published desktop, which is essentially a Windows look and feel all the way around, it was a very seamless transition to go from the Windows 7 embedded OS to essentially like another Windows look and feel with the published desktop. That's extremely important, especially when we're talking change. When you make a change like that, if we were to make a major change, that would negatively impact, I'm sure, a lot of our users. We have a lot of users that aren't, I guess, technically as savvy as others. We have some that are extremely technically savvy, but we still have quite a few that are not. Their primary focus is healthcare. They don't want to know, how the computer works. They just want it to work. So for those people, that's extremely important to keep it look and feel the same as what they had before. You make any major changes to that, and it's going to be a dissatisfier across the board, especially with our nursing staff and our physicians, which is, we strive to maintain a high physician satisfaction score. We have yearly surveys we do with them, and they give us really good feedback. We want to keep that feedback good, and we want to keep those scores high. And so Brian might be able to allude a little bit more to what those are.
Yeah, and I can actually give you, Simon, a pretty specific example. So a couple of years ago, we rolled out our EMR, and we were talking about some changes we were making to it, and we had decided to change the colors for a button within Epic, and it had to do with trying to draw some more attention towards that particular feature within Epic so that our caregivers would use it more effectively. Changing a color triggered a very large spike in our help desk call volume for that month, because users were confused about where a button was because we changed the color of it. So, even something as simple like that can be a really big deal in the healthcare world, and changing look and feel of something as basic as what the users land on and use every day is something we would have to seriously consider training materials and other things for. It's a big deal. It's crazy, but it's a big deal.
Yeah, it's amazing how we all become stuck in the mud, and we decide, this is the way I expect it to be, this is the way I want it to be, and when it changes, it's like, what am I going to do now? So I can certainly empathize with that. I'm in the process of switching from a PC to a Mac, so those twists and turns get you every time. And that's probably something that I assume, Matt, that you're highly aware of, as you go into hospitals and help them update and change systems and do new releases, that you're constantly looking at how do we make this seamless and make minimal changes for the end users. How does Coretek help with that?
Sure. So that is absolutely a common thing that we deal with, right? Every time we're walking in, it's got to be that maintain or at least present common look and feel across the organization for the solutions which we're deploying. I will say out of the gate, oftentimes as we do a new deployment, we purposefully change kind of the look and feel of the solution so that they know they've migrated to something new. From that point forward, though, it's got to be consistent. The endpoints need to look the same, right? Which with IGEL, that's just super simple task for us to be able to deploy the branding and the configuration that's going to make every one of them identical. And then from there, we get into a lot of 2016 versus Windows 10 or Windows 7 in 2008 in our two-type deployments, where we're deploying both operating systems as an availability. So the desktop operating systems and a VDI solution to be able to handle higher-end workloads like a Dragon or something along those lines, and then the task workers running on that 2008 R2 2016 type desktop, and branding those, the look and the feel between the two different operating systems is extremely important as well. Just the users want to see that, and they want to know that, hey, this is where I'm at. I'm kind of in that comfortable position. I know where all my icons are. I know what apps are available to me. They're presented in the same way. So these are all the types of experiences that Coretek helps to drive, where we walk all the way through the implementation, through the pilot, and help design the UI, help walk through the user acceptance testing to know that the applications themselves look, feel, and function like they do in production today. So it's really one of the areas that we've developed a strong expertise around.
Mm-hmm. And certainly we hear that reiterate with pretty much all of your customers. That's a key differentiator. Going back to you, Aaron, I want to dig in a little bit more about, you mentioned that you spend a fair amount of time converting over devices to IGEL. I was hoping you just walk me through, what does that look like? How do you use the UMS, and how easy or how difficult is it to convert a device to the IGEL operating system? What's your experience been in that space?
Sure. The actual conversion of the device is actually IGEL has made it pretty easy with that, because we essentially use a USB stick to image our devices. And what I did with that USB stick essentially is I pre-configured it for our field services team to be able to re-image that device, and also that it would connect to our wireless network. At the time it connects to our wireless network, that's when I can see it in UMS, and essentially add it in as a trusted device, and then give it a license. And then once that license is given to that device, pretty much it reboots at that time. What I have the field services team do is, once they give me that IP address of that device, I can pull it into UMS, and then I have our field service tech actually rename the device at that time, because we have a proprietary naming system. So they rename that device, and at that time, once that communicates back to the UMS server, and I've given it that license, it triggers a restart. And once that restart triggers, that's when it reboots and comes back up. That's when the profiles that I have built inside of UMS are applied to that device. So it gives it like where storefront is, what Improvato appliance you connect to, what are your timeout settings. There's all sorts of stuff that I have configured in there for profiles. So all that is done at that I guess that second reboot, and then once that reboot happens, they're pretty much up and ready to go. We have noticed with our imaging time, pretty much with a converter, is about, I want to say it was like 10 minutes. I think it was when I timed it, 10 to 12 minutes from start time to actually being ready to use, which is probably in the neighborhood of a third of the time it would take us to image one with a Windows device. And not only that, but when the device boots up, the processing of a UMS profile on those devices is obviously significantly faster. It's pretty much already coded in there unless you make a change, and it has to apply that change. But with our Windows devices, we did a lot of management with those, with Active Directory policy and several local policies. So when you would reboot a Windows device, it could take in the neighborhood, if I remember correctly, it could take 5 to 7 minutes to reboot a Windows thin client, just because of all the policies and stuff that it processed at time of reboot. With an IGEL device, I mean, you're talking 2 minutes most, to the point where you're actually back and using the system. So it's a significant reduction in time for the whole way around using IGELs and UMS. And as far as UMS itself, I have found it extremely easy to use. With the thin client background I have, I went through all the WISE Device Manager. We tried it with SCCM and managing thin clients, which I thought was probably one of the worst things they tried to do. Windows tried to get a little too. They tried to spread themselves. I don't know. It wasn't good. But even with WISE Device Manager, because we do use WISE devices that we have converted over to IGEL, the UMS, just handling it, the way UMS handles profiles and the simplicity of it, and you can get very granular in there with how you manage devices. It's pretty nice. I mean, you can make one small change and not affect your base system configuration. So it's really, like I said, I found it very easy to use and extremely well thought out.
And I would add
Thank you,
that,
Aaron.
So
Matt,
quick on that. Yeah, no issues. One of the big savings I think you guys realize as well is just the operational efficiencies that you gained out of endpoint management. So with the Windows embedded devices and the write filters, it was days to do an update. Like if you wanted to deploy or even capture, say, patching and or otherwise within that image, by the time you deployed it and recaptured it and tested it and went through that whole process, there was a huge operational time savings there for you guys in that space as well.
Yeah,
not to mention now updates are just a couple clicks within UMS.
Yeah.
So just, I thought it was worth mentioning because that managing those Windows devices is fairly complicated. Even without write filters, if they're traditional Windows devices, is compared to managing an IGEL device.
Yeah, exactly.
You two are a walking advert for IGEL. We really appreciate the feedback. That's what we're trying to design our technology to do, and thank you for that moral support. It's always great to hear customers say that we're achieving some of our goals here. I think my final question before we go into a wrap-up phase, and I get each of you just to give us your final thoughts on this, was, and we'll go around the three of you, is fears or concerns about Linux versus Windows. You know, there's all kinds of schools of thought out there that, you know, Linux is open source and not entirely, you know, it's really an enterprise operating system. And Windows, well, you know, it has its own pedigree, but at least you know it's controlled by Microsoft. What are your thoughts around that? Was it difficult to sell Linux into the organization, and how do you feel about that, having made that decision of moving and looking at a Linux endpoint operating system? Brian, how about we start with you?
Yeah, sure. So, you know, I think it wasn't that difficult for us. We do support some Linux devices, not my team. We actually have a separate Unix and storage and Linux team that supports, I would call them Linux server class devices. Actually, our Epic cache environment runs on one of those. And cache is the database that Epic stores all of its information in. But I would say it wasn't a very sell explicitly, because the Windows embedded endpoints that we'd been using were they were very difficult. It was already a difficult situation, and so we almost felt that it can't get a whole lot worse to patch them, even if we don't really know what we're doing with them to start with, because the previous ones were already borderline impossible to do that with. So I would say it was not very difficult for us. The IGEL management system doesn't really require us to be very hands-on with that patching process. It takes care of the underlying patching mechanisms for us, and so we don't really have to have a large knowledge of how Linux works in order to complete that patching process.
Excellent. And Aaron, your perspective?
Well, as Matt touched on, the updating of a Windows device was very difficult. It's very you have a lot of challenges there. He kind of alluded to you have to essentially build your image, do all your updates. There isn't a whole lot of space on these devices, so you have to manage your space, what you're working with. We ran into some issues with some of our other clients that needed to be installed on those devices that we no longer run into those issues with this Linux device. Really, the Linux endpoint doesn't really run much of anything except its kernel to know where to connect to, and with the Imprivata agent that's on there, knows where to go. So the management of those just is reduced significantly as far as the endpoint device. And like Brian said, we could update those devices if needed. Either the actual Linux OS, if there is some reason we have to, we can update that pretty seamlessly. And then we also have the big one that we use, the Imprivata agent. That is actually a separate piece that we can update anytime as well through our Imprivata appliances. It's not actually something I have to update the entire image for. Whereas when you're on a Windows device and they come forward, hey, we need an Imprivata update. It did not happen very quickly. It was a very complicated process, like that, just like patching a Windows patch. Bright filters, all sorts of stuff you have to deal with that. With this, now we have to update our embedded agent, our Imprivata embedded agent. It's a pretty painless process for us. So it's you can, and on top of that, you can lock down the Linux device. If we don't really run anything local to that device, but
Sure.
there are ways to get into it to do administrator type of stuff. But we really had to. We could lock that down as well. We don't, because we want to be able to service those if our field service techs need to do something. So we don't lock it down that hard. But for the most part, you have no interaction. Pretty much the only options you have when the device turns on is to either type your password in or use a badge tap and get into your published desktop. You're not doing anything on the local endpoint.
Magic. I love it. Thank you. And Matt, any final thoughts from you on that issue?
Simon, it's not a challenge that we encounter when we propose IGEL to clients. Typically, we walk in, we have that quick Linux discussion, and the security departments are like, yeah, no big deal, given that the attack surface is minimized because it's more of a secured operating system. We're locking down that endpoint device. So there is no end user interaction. They walk up, they log in. When they get out of their desktop, it goes back to a sign-in screen, and nowhere in between does anybody have any access to that device. So it's not a challenge that we've had to really debate too much, or that we've had any issues with out in the field.
Excellent. I'm pleased to hear that. Okay, gentlemen, we're coming to the bottom of the hour, to the end of our session. It's been a pleasure talking with you and listening to this story. As we've been talking about this, I've written down a few notes, and I wanted to summarize what I saw as some of the key benefits you guys have mentioned, and then I'll throw it open to you if you think I've missed anything, and then we'll announce that teaser that I promised at the beginning of the thing. So I think what I heard was, core to the value proposition of the IGEL Coretek solution for Sparrow was some of the speed conversion. It's that ability to do the imaging significantly faster, to get a clean, solid, manageable image onto any device. And that's one of the things we pride ourselves at IGEL, is that we support basically any 64-bit x86 device can be converted. And it sounds like you've really made good use of that. The second key benefit I heard was almost the context-aware settings, and I put that down as the flexibility, agility, and simplicity of using the IGEL solution, so that it will take care of that endpoint and how quickly the pause is on the Imprivata, how easy it is to manage based upon where the device is located. Whether it be in a patient room or whether it be in a doctor's desktop or somewhere outside, you can have different configurations. So context-aware settings has got to help the game. The third key benefit I heard was, IT is on the back foot, and anything that IGEL can do to help you speed the integration and implementation of systems is assisting IT to be much more efficient as the hospitals move forward, because it is a changing world out there, and the importance of IT to bring new facilities, new patients, new doctors on board is obviously mission critical. So anything we can do to help that, make that simpler, is going to help you without getting in the way of patient health. And then lastly, and definitely last but definitely not least, will be the security, and the security through control. You keep coming back, I think, to that ability to be able to be secure and to ensure the safety of patient data and patient information and the patient systems to stop errant stuff going on the devices. And frankly, those are key things that we love to hear about. We really appreciate your implementation, and thanks for all your support. Any final words, Brian, Matt, or Aaron?
Nope.
Okay, Hannah, move me on to the last slide, would you please? And we'll call it a wrap. I think that was my wrap up, so forget about that. You can always catch more information from us on igel.com or coretekservices.com, and please don't hesitate to send information and visit those websites. And then finally, as you may have heard, IGEL's in the business of handing out Teslas. We would be delighted that anybody attending this to complete the survey at igeltesla.com with the code TEC03, and that code will expire. I'm not sure if it'll expire tonight or tomorrow night, but it's sometime in the next 24 hours that code will expire. So please use that quickly and get the most of it. We do a short demo of how the technology actually works, but we'd love to get you entered into our Tesla drive, Tesla raffle. The Tesla will be raffled on Wednesday, August the 30th at VMworld in Las Vegas. You do not have to be present to win. And thank you very much for your time today. Really appreciate your spending an hour with us. That's it. Thanks, everybody. Goodbye.
Thanks, Simon.